Hey folks, today we are going to take a look at Project 1, Making a Lower Third. So this video is going to be a little more prescriptive than my usual overview video lectures, which sort of cover generally what we're doing for the week. Because this particular class has a lot of detail in it, and Adobe After Effects in particular, it's a fairly complex program, and just the concept of motion graphics is probably new to you. I am going to make, probably for the first two projects, kind of step-by-step videos showing you how to do the project. Now, the handout for the project, which is this right here, is also written in a step-by-step manner. It doesn't just give you the specifications for the project or a general overview like I normally write projects. It also walks you through how to do it step by step, page by page, which is probably why this is a 5-page assignment. So you could just read through the handout, which you can find on our learning management system, and do it that way, or you could follow along with this video and do it that way, or you could do both. Either way, it will hopefully be helpful. So this is going to be sort of a step-by-step video on how to do Project 1, Making a Lower Third video. Okay, so starting out, of course, the big question is what the heck is a lower third, right? Also known as lower third titles. These are essentially an area of graphic design that incorporates graphics and type and occasionally photography, although normally it's non-photographic graphics. And these appear as an overlay in the lower third area of a video screen, hence the name lower third. Now, when I say video screen, this could be it's normally over a television program of some kind, but it can also be any kind of video that you might find on YouTube, and so on and so forth. It's not the sort of thing you normally see in film, because that's not really what this is all about. But of course, motion graphic designers and editors use lower thirds in video and film creation to deliver information to the audience. So the best example is, if you're watching your local news and you'll see the news anchor up there talking about whatever the story is that they are focusing on, and in the lower third of the screen you will see a piece of graphic that will give you their name. It will talk about the subject that they're talking about. There might be a scroll that runs along the bottom giving you additional information. The logo for the TV station or the news program that you're watching will be there. We see those all the time. Sporting events, when they're doing the talking head segments, when sort of the sports experts are up there talking about the game of the day or whatever they're talking about, they will also use lower thirds. But you can see them in a variety of different places. You can see them on Twitch for video game videos. You can see it on HGTV where they're talking about how to renovate your house. It could be on home shopping type things where they're selling items. Either way, this sort of graphic is extremely common in television and video. Now, if you want to learn more about it, there's a great article here by Studio Binder, which you can click on that link and that'll take you to this right here. It not only goes into what exactly a lower third is, but it gives you some great design strategies for designing one. So I think you want to read through this for sure. This is good textbook reading. It'll give you some good background about what it is, but also it talks about some of the specifics like use of color, typography, the way in which you can animate it, size and position on the screen, different types of shapes and logo usages. So I think it's probably good to get super familiar with them, and it shows some examples. So this one here is an example from PBS, the Public Broadcasting System, and so there's some really good examples along the way. Some real basic, almost template-like examples that sort of shows you how they can work. And of course, they can be super simple or they can be very complicated. Some of them have animations built into them. Now, the one we're going to create for this assignment is not going to have a lot of complex animation, but it will definitely leverage the timeline in Adobe After Effects. Now, recently we went over the basics of Adobe After Effects, how you can drag content into the media panel and then move it into the layers onto your workspace and then assign when it will appear on screen and when it will disappear on screen. So those types of easy animations based on the timeline we're going to use for this assignment. So anyway, there's more examples here as you can go through. There's even sort of some nice embedded videos that take you through a bunch of sort of best practices. So anyway, make a long story short, this is a really good article. You should read through it. And there's even some templates you can get access to. But I don't want you using any of these templates. I want you to design your own lower third from scratch. However, feel free to go look at the templates just to get some inspiration and some ideas on how to design it. Okay, so back to the assignment itself. Let's get out of that article. So the first thing we're going to do is we're actually starting in Adobe Illustrator. So you're probably thinking, why are we starting in Adobe Illustrator if we're going to be building this in Adobe After Effects? Well, because Adobe After Effects while you can create original content in Adobe After Effects, you can put in typography and basic shapes. It is, in fact, I would put it under the category of layout tool. Now, I know that's an oversimplification, but if you think about it, programs like Photoshop and Illustrator, those are for creating new content or editing existing content, right? So you could bring in a photograph and then you can edit it in Photoshop. You can also do digital painting in Photoshop and create other new content or edited content. Same thing with Illustrator. You can create new graphics, new logos, new bits of typographic design, but you can also bring in other vector graphics and edit them like an existing logo or something like that. So those are like content creation and editing tools. But then other programs like Adobe InDesign or Adobe XD are layout programs where you bring in outside content and then you get it to become something else. So in Adobe InDesign, you're creating print or published documents. It could be ebooks, digital publishing, or traditional printing publishing, or something like that. Whereas in Adobe XD, you are creating web and app prototypes. So that is how it works as a layout tool. So Adobe After Effects is not really a layout tool specifically, but similar to those, you bring in most of your content from other places. So whether it be video clips or photographs or bits of sound or music or whatever, you are bringing in that content into After Effects and then you are turning it into something else. You are going to publish it as something else. And so in this way, that's how we're making our lower third here. And in the earlier demonstration we did when we first introduced Adobe After Effects, that's what we did. We dragged in a photograph and a short video clip of New York, and that sort of gave us some content to work with. So the content we are going to be working with for our lower third, before we get it into Adobe After Effects, first we have to create it and design it in Adobe Illustrator. This also gives us an opportunity to do two things: to work in the film and video section of Adobe Illustrator, which is something that you maybe haven't done, because normally when you're learning Adobe Illustrator, you are working with artboards that are normally used to create content for print or web, not so much film and video. So that might be new. And also it gives us an opportunity to see how vector graphics, which is what Adobe Illustrator does, can be easily imported into Adobe After Effects, okay? All right, so that's the marching orders. Let's see what we're doing here. So in Adobe Illustrator, you're going to create a new document, and you're going to go to the Film and Video tab, and you're going to set it at 1920 by 1080 pixels, which is your standard pixel dimension for HD TV, high definition television at the 16 by 9 ratio. And of course, because we're talking about a screen and not print, we are going to work in the RGB color model. So we go over here to Adobe Illustrator, go to File, go to New, and you're going to go up here in the New Document window. We're going to go to Film and Video, and we're going to go to 1920 by 1080, okay, which is a preset. Of course, you can punch in whatever you want over here into the details, but the preset is exactly what we're looking for. So 1920, 1080, obviously it's horizontal pixels. Make sure that your color mode is set to RGB. Because we're in the Film and Video tab, it should automatically default to RGB, because that is the color model that makes sense for film and video, but just double check it, make sure it's fine. Everything else, screen resolution, preview mode, all that fun stuff could stay the same. You can go ahead and give it a name if you would like, but we are going to save the file anyway, so you could either name it here or you can name it elsewhere. But I'm going to go ahead and just name it my last name, which you're going to use your last name, underscore, and then I'm going to call it Project 1, okay? Well, which is what this is. Now, go ahead and hit Create, and it's going to create our workspace for us. Give us a second. Get the little spinning beach ball here while it sets up. Okay, now this is going to look different than what you're used to, right? You're like, where's my artboard? Why is it not white? Why am I getting that transparent pattern in the background? And what's with all the green numbers? All right, so let's take a look at our handout, and we'll see what that's all about, right? So, of course, make sure you save your project, just like I said. Which says it right here. Also, I forgot to tell you that the underscore should be production, but you can save that in a second. So let's do that, actually. So go ahead and hit save, and save my document. Last name underscore project 1, and then underscore production. I forgot to add that. The reason why it's production is because this, of course, is not our finished project 1. This is a bit of production content. I normally like to use that naming convention when I'm building content for a finished project, just so that I know it is not the finished project. It is the content for it. So anyway, we'll save that. Save. And don't worry about the options. Just keep those as default. Okay. Now, like I said, the workspace is going to look a little different. Let's talk about why the workspace is different. So you may think the film and video workspace looks vastly different than our standard artboard, and it does look different, but it functions the exact same way. Artboards are supposed to represent sort of pieces of paper, whether they're digital pieces of paper or printed pieces of paper. Either way, the metaphor of paper is there in the world of artboards. However, when we're working in film and video, that metaphor doesn't really make sense. So you'll immediately notice that there is no digital representation of that piece of paper, and because we're designing for the screen, so like I said, the analogy of paper doesn't make sense. There are 3 sections to look at here on the screen, 1, 2, and 3. And let's go back to Illustrator so you can see them a little more clearly. There is the numerical rulers that run along the horizontal top and the vertical left side of the workspace. Then there's a green outline that's a little bit further inwards towards the center, and then another green outline which is a little bit further inwards from there. And so let's see what each of those 3 areas mean, right? So that gray on gray grid pattern, of course, you're familiar with. That's from the world of Photoshop. You know what that means, right? Gray on gray grid pattern means transparency, right? Or endless amounts of air. It's just space going on forever. And then, of course, those lime green colored areas mean these 3 things. So the outermost one with the numerical values, those are your rulers, which are just like rulers that you could pull up with an artboard. Here they're automatically visible, and the measurement is in pixels, of course. This shows the edge of the artboard, and you'll notice that that ruler will appear or disappear depending on where you're clicking on the screen. So as you add objects or click around, see how I can get it to disappear? But then when I click back inside the workspace, the ruler comes back. So it disappears temporarily, just to kind of get out of your way so you can see what you're doing. Okay, the next green border is the line that denotes what we'll call the safe space for content. So meaning any items that you place outside this border may or may not be cut off by some televisions, web browsers, or iPads. So why do we need a safe space? Well, the reason for that is because, you know, televisions are different sizes. They're mostly the same shape these days. Mostly they're 16:9, but somebody might have an older television or an older computer monitor that is not at the 16:9 ratio. Tablets, iPads, other ways in which we view things, your smartphone. Well, they all have pretty high resolution screens these days. Some of the physical dimensions of them might be a little different. And so you want to make sure that you're not putting super important content like typography, something that needs to be read, or a logo that can't really be missed. You don't want to put it outside of this safe space. So this green line here that goes around the outside of the space is your safe space. It's not the edge of the screen. The edge of the screen is out here where the ruler is. This is inside the screen, but anything outside this line, there's a chance it might get cut off by the television or the view screen that it's being looked on. So keep your important stuff inside this green line, okay? So that's good to know. So if it needs to be red or a logo, keep it inside there. Now that third green border is what we'll call the area of focus. And I guess you could consider this the really safe space, meaning that things that are super important that you want your viewer to really focus on and not miss should probably stay within that section. So typography that really has to be read, that's super important, should stay inside this second border. You'll notice the second border is not that much further inside the view screen than the first one, but it's enough that that's where everything should live. So those are kind of like your boundaries, the way in which you should work, okay? All right, so next, let's move into the next section where you're gonna design your lower third. Illustrator, you're going to design the graphics and the typography for your lower third. You're going to treat this just as a graphic design project at this point, where you're going to do a really good job using all of your design skills to put together a really good graphic that could serve as a lower third. Now, a couple things to remember here, the guidelines on how to go about doing this and sort of what your choices are for theme. So first of all, whether you're using shapes, lines, or type, each individual element must live on its own layer in Illustrator. If elements should stick together, then make sure you group them together and then keep them on their own individual layer. Make sure you name your layers so that it's easy for you to know what goes where. Basically, you're going to treat the layers in Illustrator as you would treat the layers in Photoshop. Even though in Illustrator, layers are kind of an optional thing, here we want to make sure that we are using the layers to really leverage some good organizational practices, and I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, next, you're going to pick a theme. So you can design a lower third for one of the following scenarios. You get to pick whatever scenario you want. This can be for a real place or person or a fictitious place or person. It's entirely up to you. You can make it up out of thin air, or you can do it for something that exists in the real world, but of course be creative. So here are your choices. You can create a lower third for a YouTuber's show. So lots of YouTubers out there, they have shows that come out regularly on all sorts of different subjects. You can create a lower third for a YouTuber. You can create a lower third for a local or national newscast, right? We talked about news programming being a good example of where we see a lot of lower thirds. You can create one for that. Next, you can create a lower third for a presenter at an online conference or event. There are lots of events that happen online these days, and that will continue to be the case for a good long time. And so these conferences, these events, these celebrations, these conferences, whatever they might be, Comic-Con, whatever, you are going to see a lot of people giving talks and presentations online, and they tend to use a lower third to identify who they are and what they're talking about. If you're into gaming, you might want to create a lower third for a streamer on Twitch. Lots of gamers will stream their gameplay on Twitch, and so the lower third sort of identifies what the program is, what they're playing, what's going on, etc., etc. And lastly, if you're into sports, you can create a sort of talking head segment lower third for a sports program, whatever sport you like. So those are your themes. Obviously, your choice of theme is going to help influence your choice of graphics, the colors you use, your typography choices, whatever. So make sure that you are being creative and brainstorming toward one of these themes. Make sure you choose clearly which one you want to use, because I'm going to ask you about it. Okay, now typography is a big part of lower thirds because they are meant to be read. So typographically, you have to include the three following items. The name of the person whom the lower third is identifying. That person's title or something about them. And one line of secondary information. The secondary information can be anything you want that's related to your theme. Okay, so if it's a newscast, it could be the name of the news anchor, the thing about them could talk about the story they're talking about, and maybe some secondary information is maybe there's a place on the lower third where the current temperature always shows, or what news story is coming up next, or something like that. Your overall design must be designed well, follow good design practices, including composition, color, typography, hierarchy, etc. So use your design skills. Make sure your design makes sense for the scenario you are designing for. Here's some examples of news-related lower thirds you can take a look at for inspiration. Notice that a lot of them are just geometric shapes, but some of them use recognizable graphics like this globe graphic over here. So you can, of course, use these for inspiration and come up with whatever you would like. Also, we have here some more lower thirds, but these are geared towards YouTubers. So this will give you some examples of that. Okay, so let's go over the Illustrator and take a look. So here is a lower third that I am designing in Illustrator following the instructions that we just went over. So mine is for a sports program, right? And so the person that this is for is a Barry Smith. This is entirely fictitious. I'm just making it up. So let's say he's commenting on a soccer game, or let's call it a football game, as we properly should, for a sporting program. And so Barry Smith is the former center for Manchester United, which is one of the famous soccer teams over in the UK. And so we have the name, we have his sort of title or something about him, and then my bit of secondary information is what I'm going to call an up next. It's over here. It's talking about the next soccer game that's going to happen. It's MU versus ARG, so it'd be Manchester United versus Argentina is coming up next. Now the rest of this is just sort of graphics, right? I've got some rounded rectangles, I've got some regular rectangle in the background here, some graphics over here, which we could imagine might be a logo, or maybe a soccer ball might appear in one of these circles at some point. Either way, I'm just trying to be creative and fun with it and use it as a lower third. Now, of course, the size of it is important, and the article that you read about what lower thirds are talks about that a little bit. But naturally, it can't take up too much room vertically because you don't want to be covering the video of the person that's on the screen. Notice that my graphics don't start until I get to the safe outline here, right? The safe space one. And then the typography doesn't start until I get to the rectangle that represents the area of focus, okay? So what really needs to be read stays inside the area of focus, but then other graphics like the back side of this rectangle can extend outwards. I could have graphics extend all the way to the edge of the screen if you want. That's okay too. So if I wanted to, I could take this rectangle and extend it all the way out here, knowing that a chunk of it might get cut off by somebody's video screen, but that's okay because it's really just, you know, background graphics. So you sort of decide. Now, as far as where it lands vertically, I've chosen to have the whole thing inside the area of focus on a vertical axis, just because I want to make sure that all the typographic items that need to be read can be read. That being said, same deal. If I wanted my background rectangle to be a little taller and extend below the area of focus, I could do that too. So that works as well. So either way, you design it how you want. Now, I did talk about organizing things in the layers palette. So let's take a look at that. You'll see over here in my layers palette, I'm going to separate it over here so you can take a look. You'll see that I have different layers for different things. So here's the person's name, and then if I shut the eyeball off and on, you can see there goes the name, including the shadow. His title, there goes the title. The up next part, there goes the up next part. There's a rounded rectangle behind the name and title, my little circles over here, and then my bar graphics here, and then the larger background graphic here. So everything is nice and organized in the layers. That will make life a lot easier when I am importing this over to Adobe After Effects. Now, this part of the project should take you a little while. Don't just slap together some graphics really quickly. Make sure that you've put some thought into the theme that you chose and that you're putting some thought into your typography choices, your color choices, and make sure that it makes sense for what you're doing. So go ahead, take some time to design this, and then we'll come back and talk about importing it over to Adobe After Effects. Okay, so by now you have finished designing your lower third in Adobe Illustrator. You can see that I've finished mine up here. I went ahead and just organized a couple of things a little bit better. I added this nice graphic of a soccer ball over here inside one of my circles. So now I have my nice lower third for my sports program ready to go in Adobe Illustrator. Got my layers all nice and organized. If you've been locking any layers just to keep your stuff nice and neat, make sure you unlock all of them. Save your file. Okay, so now that we've finished this, we can shut down Adobe Illustrator. We don't need it open for this next step. We're next going to move our Adobe Illustrator file over to Adobe After Effects. First, of course, we have to open up Adobe After Effects and start a new project. So let's do that. So I'm going to shut down this Illustrator project here. I'm going to minimize Illustrator. Okay, so back over to our handout. So now we're going to import your lower third graphic into Adobe After Effects. So of course, open up Adobe After Effects. As you can see, I've got it running in the background here. And you're going to click on New Project from the welcome screen. And then we're going to click New Composition, like I showed you last time. And in Composition Settings, make sure you name the composition the same thing we did before, just your last name _, project 1. But without production. We don't need production on this. It's going to be the main file. The preset we're going to go with is HDTV 1080 25 and then click OK. All right, so let's go over and do that in After Effects. So here we are on the welcome home screen. I'm going to hit New Project, and then that brings us into our workspace. New Composition, and the name, again, I'm going to name it my last name _ project 1. And then from the preset, make sure you're going with HDTV 1080 25. All of the specifics will fill themselves in, and then go ahead and hit OK. Okay, so now we are ready to start importing our Illustrator file, right? So now back over to our handout. Let's talk about how we do that. So now you're going to be moving the elements from Adobe Illustrator into After Effects. So you're going to go to File, Import, and then File. And then you're going to find your Adobe Illustrator file, right? So File, Import a file, right? File, import, file, and then mine is sitting on my desktop, so as soon as my browser pops up, I'm going to find that and choose it. There it is right there. There's my Illustrator file. And then we're going to make sure we set all of these parameters exactly the way it should be set. So it should say all acceptable files, right? Under import as, we want it to be composition, and we're going to retain layer sizes. This is why it's important that we had everything nice and organized in our layers palette, right? And then make sure that you have checked off create composition, and then we'll hit OK. So composition, retain layer styles, so all acceptable files. So import, now here it defaults to footage. I don't want that. I want composition, retain all layer sizes, create composition. Good, ready to go. Hit OK. Boom. And give it a second, and there you go. There is my Illustrator stuff. Came in nicely as a folder over here. Now you'll see over here in our media window that it's the same name as my Adobe Illustrator file, Previt, Project 1 Production Layers, and it's in a folder, and then inside that folder, as I fold it down, are all the different layers. So I can click on each one. There's my bars, there's my rectangle, there's the circle with the soccer ball, there's the name, there's the blue rectangle in the background, there's the title, and then there's the up next. Nice and neat as vector pieces. Pretty great, right? So aside from these layers that came in the folder with all our vector, and notice you can see the Adobe Illustrator logo here so that it connects it really nicely. You can see that it also brought in a new composition of these layers. So here's the composition we made that's still blank. Here's the new composition. So let's double click on that. And now that becomes the active composition. And look what happened over here. All of our really cool graphics from Illustrator gets moved into the composition screen over here. So let's review what just happened. We created our graphic in Adobe Illustrator. We imported it directly into Adobe After Effects, and it did two things. It sent us over a folder that contains each of our individual layer items from Illustrator. You can see those up here. And then it also created a brand new composition that followed the parameters of the new composition that we made a second ago that was blank, and it took all of those nice layers from Illustrator and put them in the composition exactly where we wanted them. So look how nice that looks, right? Now, the other thing to notice is now that we've activated this new composition by double-clicking it, you'll see that over here in the Layers palette in Adobe After Effects, each of those individual items shows up as its own layer, named exactly the same way it was named in Illustrator. So we did all the hard work, all the organization in Illustrator up front, and it just translated nicely over to Adobe After Effects. And of course, you can test it out by turning off and on the eyeballs. So there's the name, there's the title, there's the up next section, there's the rounded rectangle, there's the circles with the soccer ball, there's the bars, and there's my background rectangle. Nice and organized, exactly the way it is. Now, of course, I can also click on these items here in the composition screen, right? Let me zoom in a little bit here so we can see a little bit better. Okay, let's move around just a smidge here, move this up. Okay, there we go. So you can see that if I grab my selection arrow, I can go ahead and, I can go ahead and select the items individually on the screen. So I can not only grab them by the layers, but just like in Illustrator, of course, I can pick them up here and make changes that way. Now, because Adobe After Effects supports vectors, if I want to, I could literally move some stuff around here. I don't have to go back to my Illustrator file to make changes. So for example, my up next typographic here, MU versus ARG, right? Manchester United versus Argentina. If I don't like the location, I don't have to go back to the Illustrator file, make the change, and then re-import. I can do it here. So I could pick it up and literally move this anywhere that I want. So if I decide that that's not really the right place, maybe I want it a little lower inside the rectangle, I can just move it down right here. And so I'm doing some editing to my vector graphic right here. If I decide I want to make the large rectangle in the back a little taller, well, I can just do that here and expand it inside Adobe After Effects. Now, you don't really want to do a ton of drawing in Adobe After Effects. You want to keep that for programs like Adobe Illustrator. So if I wanted to do something really complex, of course, you would want to go back and do that in Illustrator. But simple edits you can do right here. You can resize things. You can reposition things pretty much however you want. You can squish things, although I wouldn't really recommend that. But anyway, you get the idea. And of course, you can undo and redo and move stuff around and whatnot. So let's say I'm happy with it there. Okay, now I'm good to go. Pretty good, right? So I've got all the elements for my lower third in here. The graphic looks good. It all imported nicely. I've got it nice and organized. Now, while you can zoom in and out on the view screen, because of course we're talking about screen resolution, I generally recommend only zooming in when you want to do some detail work, move some stuff around, make sure it's in the right spot. But when you're actually going to go ahead and apply some animation to it, make sure you're back at 100% so you're seeing it the way it's sort of meant to be seen, right? So keep it at 100%, and then just sort of center your screen here, and you can go from there. Okay, so next we're going to talk about how are we going to animate our lower third. Now, before you start animating the different elements, remember, so far we have covered a lot of ground, and we've only been doing this for a short period of time. So you have a bunch of skills that you can use to animate these various elements to have them come onto the screen when they're supposed to over a period of time. So remember, over here in the bottom, we have your layers, and it has their associated timelines. Each of these elements from these layers are set to run the entirety of the timeline, right, from beginning to end. But you can change that. You can have things come on and off the screen at certain times. So, for example, if I don't want his name to show up until a couple of seconds into the timeline, then I can simply move back the beginning part of that layer. And so when I hit play on the playhead, you can see that it will scroll along there. And then about 4 seconds into the feed, boom, there's his name. Now, just by moving the positioning of the timelines, you are having things appear on screen with no effect. They're just appearing. So I can have his title show up a couple seconds after that, right? And then I could have the circles with the soccer ball turn up right after that. And then maybe the up next that talks about that upcoming game. Maybe I have that show up a little bit later, and then we'll see how that goes. And of course, you have all these different layers to play with. So you're going to want to play around and make different animation choices that make it dynamic and interesting. Now, you can have all sorts of things animated. You can have the rectangle in the background appear, the rounded rectangle appear. You're trying to tell a linear narrative story. So you're introducing different elements to the stage at different times. So let's even have that background come in a couple of seconds into it, the rounded rectangle shortly after that, and then these other graphics shortly after that. Okay, so this way we're starting with a black video screen, and then we're going to have everything introduced at different points. See how it's staggered where they get introduced into the timeline. All right, remember to hit save and go ahead and save your project before we get too far down the rabbit hole here, right? So again, it's your last name _ project 1. Stick it on the old desktop. So now I've saved my After Effects file. Okay, so now let's go ahead and run play and see what happens. Boom. So here it goes. There's the background. Boom, 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 boom. And then here comes our soccer ball. Boom, there you go. Ready to go. And there's more. We got the up next coming. Boom, there it goes. Now, that is not the most beautiful and elegant set of animations, but I just want us to play around with the ability to introduce different elements onto the screen at different times to try to tell a type of narrative. Okay, this is your first project. I just want you to get used to that. Now, on the other side of things, you can have these elements disappear from the screen by simply moving their end points inwards. So you could have the up next, for example, only stay on the screen for a period of time and then it disappears. Okay, and of course you can now start to imagine, hey, I could have one element disappear and then add more elements down here, and they could appear at different times in the timeline. Now remember, you do have some skills already from this. At the beginning of the semester, we went through and you have all of these videos that you've already watched and practiced with, or you're hopefully finishing up doing. So, you know, what is After Effects, main panel, settings, basic After Effects tools, and more tools. So you should have some good skills just to do this basic animation. Now, let's see, what are the parameters for animating it? So back to the assignment. So again, like I just went over, you're going to focus on the timeline layers in Adobe After Effects down the bottom here. And using the skills that you've gained thus far and what we've already gone over a couple of times, you're going to animate these elements of your lower third so that they appear on the screen in a time-based and engaging fashion. So they should appear one element at a time. Try to think about timing and the story that it's telling and how dynamic you want it to be. Remember, it's a different story if they all appear quickly, boom, 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 and it's a different story if they appear slowly, boom, 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 right? You can have certain things pause, and of course, you can also have things disappear at the end of it. Now, there are some extra credit options for this assignment. You could add a background, either a photographic or a video layer, to show who or what the lower third would be over. So, for example, if I come back here, I have this stock photograph of a news person. I'm going to drop him over here into my media. So there he is. And then I'm going to put him into my composition, right? I'm going to move the timeline so I can see everything. And then I'm going to grab that picture of that guy and put him here. Now, he's way too big, so I'm going to have to zoom out here. It's a really big photograph. And let's shrink him down a little bit. Make sure you hold your shift key on your keyboard so that you don't squish the guy or gal or whoever you're squishing. So let's get them in place. Okay, and we'll position it on screen here. Make sure you're nice and centered. Okay, now of course in layers, he has come in as the top layer, and I can name it whatever I want, but I usually double click on the layer just to make sure I get a nice clear view of it. Then I get rid of that tab. Now I'll go back down here, and of course if you right click, the contextual menu gives you a chance to rename it, and we'll say news, well actually not news anchor, it's the sports guy. So sports guy, yeah I know, silly name. Hit return. Now, of course, I want to move him to the back of the pile of the layers, just like you would in Photoshop. So now he's behind the graphics, right? So now let's go back up to our 100%, and boom, there he is. So if you do that at the end, you have now given yourself some extra credit points because you've added somebody. So go ahead and hit play, and boom, 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 and so on and so forth. So now it looks like you've got a person behind your lower third, and that'll help you make some decisions. In fact, if you go and put a photo or a little video clip behind your graphics, it might also make you want to make some changes to where your lower third is sitting. Maybe you might want to move it down just a smidge or up just a smidge or whatever. Remember, pay attention to those safe zones we talked about in Illustrator, but you might want to move a couple things around a little bit. So that's one extra credit option. The other extra credit option is to continue with your animation, but move outside of the layers palette and start using some of the effects and presets that are in the layer palettes over, not the layer palettes, that are in the effects palettes over here. So back to After Effects, you go over here, effects and presets. You can see you've got a whole bunch of presets you can play around with. So if you've learned about that and you know how to do it and you want to play around with some more of that, go ahead and do it. Just remember, you have to choose the layer that you want to apply the effect to first in the layers palette and then go over and play around with your layers. Now, if you haven't learned that yet or you're not comfortable with that, you don't have to do it. Another bit of extra credit you could do is add some music to your lower third presentation. If you get some free to use Creative Commons licensed music bits, or from some of the other places in our Tools, and More Tools handout, and you want to add a little bit of music behind it, you can do that too. You will get 5 extra points for each of these extra credit options that you might choose to do. But if not, at minimum, make sure that you are fulfilling the assignment up through this point. Now, there are 3 deliverables. You're going to make sure you turn in the Illustrator file that we just did, that's your production file, the After Effects file, which is this guy over here, make sure that's turned in as your final. So the Illustrator file comes in as your draft, check the deadlines, you'll know when it's due, and the After Effects file comes in as your final, again, check the deadlines, you'll know when it's due. At the end of the semester, we're going to publish these to YouTube, but you don't have to worry about that right now. All right, so that is the walkthrough for Project 1. I hope you find that helpful. I'm really looking forward to seeing the awesome lower third graphics that you were going to create for the scenario of your choice. All right, good luck, and if you need any help, you know where to find me. Go get working.